นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings to you all. Probably the reason everybody comes to practice the Dhamma, and it's the reason the Buddha himself was practicing, because nobody likes suffering. Nobody likes pain, discomfort, disappointment, despair, all the kind of negative things about life. Nobody wants that. Nobody likes that. So the Buddha himself was looking for a way out. And the reason we still know his teachings today is because he found it. He found the way to the highest happiness, Nibbana. That which is beyond the conditions of the world that bring us stress, suffering, pain. Beyond the ups and downs. Beyond the uncertainties of a mind that is always following thoughts and moods and getting attached to unpleasant experiences and getting confused by them. The Buddha found a way through all that, and that led him in the end to teach, to show others, explain to others what that way is. And his way of teaching was based on his own personal experience, and that has been the way other students of the Buddha since the time of the Buddha have taught as well, like Ajahn Kalyano, our teacher. He was teaching from what he had realized through his own practice. The Buddha himself followed the teachers of the day, the leading teachers, went to study with some of them, went to meditate with some of them, and he developed great skill in entering states of samadhi, calm. But what he found was when he entered a state of samadhi and then left that state or withdrew from that state, he still had the same old patterns of thinking coming up, worries, anxiety, discontent. So his conclusion was samadhi, as practiced at that time in India, is not enough to free the mind, liberate the mind from stress and suffering. He recognized that he still had attachments, worries, attachments to family, parents, wife, child, and maybe other things. He still had a sense of self that could be shaken by pleasant and unpleasant experiences. He recognized that. So that's why he went off to look for another way, or something more. And at first he went to practice the ascetic practices with his 5 friends, which we just chanted about in the Dhammacakka Sutta, in the path of self-deprivation, really training the body and the mind to kind of cope with extreme deprivation of the body, like fasting for long periods, going without sleep, sitting without moving for days on end, ultimately bringing himself to the point almost dying. He was so weak. They say the Buddha, prior to his enlightenment, he got so weak, you could put your finger on his stomach and you touch his backbone. All that's left is skin and bones, so he's very close to death. Very weak, skinny. He pushed his body to the extreme, but still not enlightened, still not fully understanding the way out of suffering. So he decided that's not the way. Samadhi, as taught by the teachers of the day, is certainly a good thing, brings one a lot of bliss and peace, but still attachments there when you come out of samadhi. Self-deprivation, pushing the body to extremes, requires a lot of endurance and discipline, a lot of determined effort, but also doesn't bring the mind to understand the way to abandon attachment, go beyond it. So that led the Buddha to go off on his own, and his friends thought he had given up, but actually wanted to be on his own to ponder, consider what's missing, what's lacking. And he realized he had to cultivate mindfulness and investigate, and particularly coming out of these states of jhana and samadhi that he'd already developed. He had skill in that. He realized when you calm your mind down, make your mind firm, peaceful in samadhi, when you come out of that and start thinking normal thoughts again, because in samadhi you don't really think much or know much, that's where you have to be very careful, very mindful, and maintain that ability to observe your own mind, your own self, and how craving forms based on every experience, so like seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, and remembering things, thinking about things, stimulates craving. But when you have calmed your mind, developing mindfulness, you're in the best position, the best place to really observe this going on, observe the process where suffering arises. In samadhi you can't do that very well because you're just calm and still. And that still has a role to play, it's still a very essential role in the practice, but we also need to investigate, contemplate our experience. And this is what the Buddha realized on the night of his enlightenment. These attachments to, first of all, to one's own body, feelings and emotions, then to more external things like people, like family, possessions, ideas, ideology, beliefs, and so on. These have to be contemplated. Because when you grasp hold of everything, both physical things and mental things, when you grasp without full awareness, it stimulates craving every time. Craving just keeps getting manufactured or produced by the mind. But you can use the mindfulness that you've developed, and the clarity, the clear comprehension, and the other good qualities you developed as you've been developing samadhi, to deal with that, to maintain awareness as you observe craving arising, stimulated by different thoughts and experiences over and over again. So you realize what the important thing is to sustain the awareness and then investigate. Even if one enters a deep state of samadhi, the mind is very still. When one comes out, it's essential to contemplate, to investigate. And you can do that well when mindfulness is established. When mindfulness is established, it's continuous. Then you can keep in touch or keep close to the different kinds of craving that arise, stimulated by our experience. So say your eyes see a form. If it's a form that is attractive to you, and everyone's character is different, you see something that's attractive to you, then your eyes want to keep looking, don't they? There's a wanting that arises. What's the most powerful kind of wanting? Probably based around sexual desire and attraction to the physical body. So as we know, the majority of internet activity is based around pornography, from kids from 10 years old through till old age pensioners. You might say it makes the world go round, it makes the internet of the world go round. You're learning to see that, see what's going on. Why does the mind go to look for those things, and why does it get stuck there? Well, it's craving, it's the action of craving. When mindfulness is established, maybe you can observe that at work. And one thing that is revealed when mindfulness is established and you see craving coming up over and over again, wanting, liking, then maybe liking and wanting, desiring gradually fades, and then we want more or different. It's a very tiring process. Normally we don't really see how tiring it is, how wearisome it is, because the mind's always looking for the next thing, and because the world produces the next object. Obviously not just pornography, but it can be clothing or music or entertainment or even knowledge that can be useful for a career or earning a living in one way or another, or even useful stuff that helps people. There's always something else for the mind to move on to. As long as that's possible, as long as there's more objects for the mind to move to, craving is often not really exposed and not seen. But if you've practiced and developed some strong continuous mindfulness, it does start to reveal what's going on. And you see a process by which craving is stimulated, maybe by seeing and the different objects that we can see, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching. And if there's not much externally to stimulate us, well, we can just go back to memory and imagination. That will do just fine. But as long as there are objects available, the mind goes to that, and craving is stimulated. Craving basically for pleasure. So we say sense objects. Desirable sense objects bring pleasure, sometimes very fleeting, temporary pleasure, sometimes longer lasting. Or the other way, craving to get rid of unpleasant stimulation, unpleasant objects, something you don't like. You've seen one thing, but then you're not happy with it anymore, so you scroll down to look for something new. So you get rid of what you've got currently in front of you to move on to the next thing. So craving to get, to have, to following different desires and habits of desire that we built up, and then craving to get rid of what we're bored with, what no longer stimulates us, what no longer gives us the happiness that we're seeking. But when you establish some mindfulness of that, it gets really boring. Not the object so much, but the actual actions of craving, the way craving moves the mind, and not just the mind, but leads us to action as well. We've got to follow craving all the time. It's almost like there's this insatiable craving going on in our mind, a bit like a slave driver or some kind of bully in the back of our mind, always making us want something else, something more, new, get rid of what we don't like, get what we want. It's never satisfied. So we live with a lot of discontent in life. And you might actually say that's what makes the world go round. The discontent of human beings means they're always looking for more, better, different, following craving. But the practice of, particularly of mindfulness and then investigation, development of insight, reveals this. And you start to see what the problem is, what the cause of your discontent is. At first you think you're discontent because you can't get what you want, or you can't keep what you want, or it doesn't give you the pleasure, as much pleasure as you would like. Later on you realize it's the actual wanting is the problem. Wanting itself is just endless. When you see that, what happens to the mind? The mind starts to tire, get weary, get tired of wanting. But that's not the same as aversion, saying not wanting. It's not that you get tired of wanting, then you go to not wanting. You get tired equally of both, wanting and not wanting. And the mind prefers just to go back to stillness. So what the Buddha found was that contemplating like this, when the mind was peaceful, and then coming out of that peace with mindfulness, sustained, keeping his mindfulness, contemplating his experience, he realized the impermanent nature of the objects of craving and desire, wanting, the impermanent nature of wanting itself, the imperfect, unsatisfactory nature of wanting and the objects of the wanting, and then ultimately the ownerless nature of it all. There's no one there that you can say is the owner of this wanting. It's just a force of nature, you might say, that's stimulated by ignorance, lack of understanding. And as long as we do nothing about it, we'll just keep going ahead doing its thing. Like being under the influence of a bully or a slave driver, and it just seems like that's just the way it is, there's nothing you can do. But as you practice mindfulness, investigate what's going on in your mind, it changes, and you start to tire of this constantly following the instructions of the slave driver of craving, and your mind is willing to put things down, let things go. So we get this practice of letting go of attachment, or we say detachment, practicing detached awareness as we go about our business, practicing mindfulness, investigating the truth. So people always have this question, on retreats, they say, well, how can you practice in living in the world and you have to go to work and run a family and be a responsible person and do things? Isn't it all just craving and it's going to be impossible to practice? Well, you're training yourself to practice with detachment, with letting go as you do these things, as you engage with the world. And of course, at first it's difficult because craving is fast and it's sneaky and it's powerful and it's habitual, so it'll just come up whether you like it or not. But if you keep investigating and watching and learning, craving is gradually undermined little by little. And it's possible even to go about your business and abandon craving at the same time. Obviously at first it's not perfect, so there's following craving and then there's a letting go of craving, back and forth. And we know that because one moment you're peaceful, the next you're caught up into another mood. More anxiety, more fear, more anger, more desire for this and that. It's kind of never ending. But those moments where the wanting subsides and you have enough clarity to see that and know that gives you wisdom, insight to say, this craving can be abandoned if I work hard enough at it. But it takes effort, and you have to be willing to work with suffering and stress and unpleasantness. There's no way around it. Everyone would like to get to Nibbana, get to the end of craving, the end of suffering, without doing anything. We're all like that. We just like to drift along and get there without having to put forth the slightest bit of effort. But that's impossible. Nibbana has its causes just like everything else. And we have to be willing to look and learn from our experience. To face craving means you have to go against craving half the time, not give in to it. Frustrate it, stop it, see it, stop it. And that's quite hard work and very frustrating, which is why there's so few enlightened people in the world. It doesn't mean to say it's impossible or not worth doing. It just means you have to be prepared for what's required. People often think, to develop this path you have to put forth a lot of physical effort. And true, there is a certain amount of physical effort required, so to sit meditation, put attention on the breath, do walking meditation. But at the same time, it's not unreasonable amount of physical effort. We use just the same kind of physical effort to earn a living, do a job, go here, go there. If you have kids or family, you'll require lots of effort to look after them, look after your household. It's nothing different than that. It's simply directing your mind, training your mind to develop effort in identifying, craving and abandoning it. Working with it, letting it go. And the Buddha gave us lots of good teachings how to bring up this effort and how to understand what's going on, how to understand craving and see it and then deal with it. In the beginning, the Buddha encouraged us to keep the 5 precepts. And if you can't keep the 5 precepts, which is your choice, then you haven't even begun practicing what the Buddha taught. So many people are saying, I'm Buddhist, but they still drink, they tell lies, they do all kinds of dodgy things. That's not Buddhism. That's not the beginning to restrain craving. If you're still following your craving on the coarsest level, that's where your problem is. You've got to start there, get the 5 precepts established. That takes effort, doesn't it? Say you're going to give up drinking or taking drugs, you have to be able to say no. And that will bring up frustration. Frustration in yourself, frustration in other people around you, because it's a social thing. If you've got a mosquito or an ant biting you, to not kill it takes effort. You have to be willing to find another way to solve the problem without killing, if you're going to keep the precept. To be honest in your speech, honest in your actions, takes effort, especially if other people around you are not honest. But if you really want to train your mind to go against craving, this is what you need to do. It's as simple as that. There's no way around it. You can do as many meditation retreats as you want, you can listen to Dhamma talks, you can declare yourself a Buddhist, but if you're not keeping the 5 precepts, it's not going to work. You simply won't progress in the path that the Buddha taught. So that's a big challenge in this day and age, because it's not very fashionable to keep 5 precepts on a regular basis. And fair enough, it's a personal choice thing, but don't be surprised if you don't use the precepts, if you end up with a lot of suffering. It's as simple as that. We have to restrain our craving, our defilements on the coarsest level first, so we commit to keeping precepts. And sometimes we forget, or the craving's so strong, we can't keep to the precepts, so then you have to start again. Buddhist practice involves a lot of starting again. Just as we know when we meditate, try to be mindful, then we lose our mindfulness, start again, beginner's mind, over and over again. Precepts are the same. Developing enough awareness to restrain the worst of our greed, the worst of our selfishness and anger and fears. We have to keep doing it. That's why it's called practice, over and over again. But if you keep the Buddha in mind, you get some strength to do that. Because the Buddha had to go through the same process, and all the other enlightened beings since the time of the Buddha, they've all done the same thing. It's not beyond anyone, but it requires some effort, some training, some practice. And sometimes you have to ignore other people who have different values, they have different way of doing things. Maybe their way is still following craving very obviously, and actually leading into a lot of suffering. Sometimes you just have to say no. You understand for yourself what is the way to peace, the way that's going to help you improve. So you have to say no to their way, if that's what's happening in your life. It's not always easy. But you've got to start somewhere, haven't you? That's why taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha gives you the strength to maybe commit to keeping precepts and developing mindfulness and meditation on a regular basis. You keep returning to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. You notice when mindfulness is improved a bit, more continuous, then it's possible to observe your own mind and just see thoughts coming up, craving arising, but not to buy into it. It becomes more possible with the presence of mindfulness. It's like the mind can watch but not get so involved or caught up in every mood, every thought that comes into the mind. That's when you can really see your own mental states as impermanent, unsatisfactory, as not self, without owner. And where does each mental state come from? It has its own causes and conditions. So like if you do see something you like, puts you in a mood of attraction maybe, the desire, the wanting comes up. That has its specific causes. There's an eye, there's something to be seen, and you see it. And then with the pleasant feeling arising, craving is stimulated. I like that, you keep looking. But if you're more mindful, you see that happening, then you can say, well, I don't have to keep looking. You can look away. And that's one way of dealing with it. Or if your mindfulness is strong enough, you say, okay, craving's arisen, but I'm not going to follow this. And what happens to it? It drops away. If you don't indulge it, you don't hold on to that mood of craving, the trains of thought, you don't keep looking, then it will fade. The desire to look will fade. Because you're not engaging it, you're not giving it any importance. This is what you learn as you practice meditation, how to watch things but without engaging or identifying with them so strongly. So things come and go. Moods, mental states, thoughts, they arise, they pass away. They're impermanent, because that's what they are. They're impermanent states of mind. And that what's impermanent is not a self. So we say they're without an owner. They don't just exist. They're not really you, a person, a being. They're mental states that arise within one consciousness. When there's no mindfulness, the delusion of self comes up, and so we say, oh, that's me. I am wanting this, I like this, I don't like that. We identify with every feeling, every thought, every mental state. And that's where all the confusion and the suffering, the discontent comes from. If the mindfulness is maintained, the feeling of discontent subsides. You may still have desires arise, but you just watch them. You don't have to follow them. And the mind goes to peace, maybe even more peace than when it was in a state of samadhi. When you're practicing vipassana, and you see desire as impermanent, as not self, your mind really goes peaceful then. It's like it's right in front of you. Oh, nobody owns this. It's just a feeling. It's just a thought. It's not that the Buddha or Ajahn Chah or any enlightened teacher didn't have to go through this process. It's not like that they were born without craving. They were. They had craving, but they were willing to work with it, restrain it, see it, know it, and then abandon it, not follow it. So as Ajahn Chah would say, as long as you don't give up, you don't quit, you keep practicing, you'll get results sooner or later. But the results will come from the effort. What we usually do is sit there saying, I want to be peaceful. We're back with wanting again. Instead of saying, I want to watch my favourite program, movie, or listen to my favourite music, or eat my favourite food, or whatever. You say, I want to be peaceful. It's just migrated to a different kind of wanting, but it's still the same problem. So as you meditate, don't even want to be peaceful. Just go back to establishing mindfulness, maintaining the mindfulness, and contemplate all these mental states are impermanent, they're not self. They're without an owner. Or you can do it the other way around, like tonight we're 7 days after the Buddha gave the Dhammacakka Sutta on a Salaha Puja. 7 days later he gave the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, if I remember correctly, when the 5 ascetics all became enlightened arahants. He's teaching them to investigate what is self. Is there anything that you can take as self? Do you really own anything? Physical, mental, This body, do you own it? No, because it gets old, gets sick, it dies. Feelings, do you own them? No, because they arise according to conditions, pleasant feeling, neutral feeling, unpleasant, painful feeling. If feeling was self, you just command your feelings to be pleasant all day long, but they're not. You can't do that. So that's another way to understand what the Buddha was talking about, is actually go looking for what you think is really you. Ask the question, is that me? Am I my thoughts, and my feelings, my memories, this body, my possessions, my home, my car, my phone, my favorite this, my favorite that. We say my, and we have the sense of ownership, but none of it belongs to us. Whether it's internal thoughts and feelings or external material things. Nothing lasts, nothing, we don't really own any of it. Keep asking that question and then the mind learns, doesn't it? When it learns, it goes quiet because it's learned its lesson. Oh, I didn't own that anyway. That's another way of dealing with craving. It's just ask, what do I own anyway? What can I own? Can this craving really lead me to own and have anything? And the Buddha would probably say no. That's why you abandon craving. It just doesn't lead to any permanent happiness, contentment. Can't do it. So there are a few reflections on craving and dealing with craving. Maybe I'll leave the talk there.